Hey, Dan Dresner, is surprised that India's Prime Minister Modi was one of the first to congratulate Joe Biden. He, of course, has had a prior relationship with Joe Biden. South Korea's Moon did the same thing. Boris Johnson, also seen as an ally of Donald Trump, came out very quickly, congratulated Joe Biden, and said he looked forward to working with him on climate change and other issues as well. It seems world leaders are lining up quickly as they can, other than the usual suspects, to congratulate the president-elect.
Yeah, it's interesting to note that, I mean, traditionally what would happen is that the losing candidate would concede, and at which point you would then see the raft of congratulations going to the winner. The fact that obviously Donald Trump has violated that norm and is sort of, in the White House pouting about the fact that he lost, has opened the door for other things to happen that essentially confer legitimacy on Joe Biden. And the very fact that you have Modi and Macron and Merkel and Benjamin Netanyahu and the King of Saudi Arabia all congratulating Biden in some ways indicates that Donald Trump can tout all he wants. The rest of the world is going to move on from him. This just adds to the idea that the world has accepted that Joe Biden is the president-elect. It's just a question of how long it takes for Donald Trump to accept that fact.
Donnie has a question for you, Richard. Donnie?
Mr. Haas, always nice to talk to you. Obviously, a big theme of or takeaway of the Trump presidency was the bromance with Vladimir Putin. If you were advising Biden, his first kind of Russia reach out or non-reach out or stance on Putin, what's the move for him at this point?
First of all, it's noteworthy, Donnie, that we haven't yet heard from Mr. Putin. He and some of the other authoritarian leaders have not congratulated Mr. Biden, which tells you something. They're unhappy campers today. I'd say the most important thing with Russia in the short run is just to nail down the nuclear arms control agreement that's due to expire in mid-February. Just extend it. There's lots of issues down the road about capturing new systems, maybe China's involvement. But, the inbox facing Joe Biden is so crowded that the last thing we need is a new era of nuclear arms competition with Russia. And then I'd say after that, then there's time to think about a comprehensive Russia policy. Talk to the European allies, talk to others. How do we deal with what they're doing in Ukraine? How do we deal with their interference in our elections? How do we deal with their attempt to murder their opposition politicians? So there's all sorts of issues. There's time for that, though. That's, if you will, round two. Round one, I would say, with Russia is simply to stabilize this last remnant, in some ways, of the Cold War.
Dan Dresner, Caddy K has a question for you. Caddy.
Policy challenge facing the United States and the rest of Europe at the moment probably is China. And it was never really very clear during the course of the campaign how much Joe Biden's China policy differed from Donald Trump's policy. I'm sure the language will change, but are we going to see a real sea change in how the U.S. approaches China? And is there now an opportunity to perhaps bring, the rest of the world on board with China in order to have a more effective policy towards China?
I think you've just identified the primary difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump on China. I mean, I think they had the same position in that you had to view China as a rival that needs to be dealt with. There's no denying that. But the difference was that Donald Trump did it in this sort of scattershot, unilateral fashion that wound up harming the U.S. economy far more than it helped. Whereas I think Joe Biden has consistently said throughout speeches during the campaign that he wants to deal with China, but he wants to deal with them in a coordinated way, working with allies and partners. So this presumably gives both Biden and America's allies across the world an opening in which they can potentially try to coordinate policy with respect to China. Now, of course, this also raises the awkward question of whether the allies and partners will be on board. You can argue that one of the problems sometimes during the Obama administration, for example, was that allies weren't necessarily on the same page in terms of dealing with China. And so it'll be interesting to see going forward whether, all sides basically take advantage of this opportunity to actually push together and coordinate an approach towards China that simultaneously keeps them in the global economy, but also potentially deals with the security concerns.
Well, Richard Haas, it's interesting that for all of his bluster about China, there was such an inconsistency coming from Donald Trump, who clearly admired President Xi, who would lavish praise on him 1 minute, then attack China the next. And also such an inconsistency with Russia, where you had the president of the United States, the commander in chief, being so obsequious to Russia that it required the United States Congress and others in our government to take a pretty tough line on Russia. I'm wondering if, oddly enough, the return to normalcy of a president that doesn't kowtow to Vladimir Putin in the long run doesn't end up being in the best interest of Russia as well, that we can actually, with our allies, move forward and begin a more constructive relationship.
Well, again, that will be one of the principal differences with both. It won't be unilateral. And I think in the case of Russia, what's so interesting about Putin, Joe, is that he's been quite effective in his foreign policy in Ukraine, in Syria, and so forth. But at home, it's a mess. It's one of the worst performers in the world against COVID-19. And then also, this is a country essentially without a modern economy, without a modern political system. If Putin were to die tomorrow, it's not clear to me whether there would be anything like an orderly transition. I can hear Twitter already saying, who are you as an American to talk about transitions? But seriously, I think actually the system in Russia is fundamentally at risk. Putin has not put down the foundation stones of a 21st century country. So if he understands that foreign policy is not going to be an area of major opportunity, just maybe Russia will finally begin this process of modernizing. Otherwise, I think Russia's future is an enormous question mark over it.
Yeah. Okay. So this different reaction from President Putin last time around. So in this segment, we've been showing newspaper headlines from around the world. We're going to close with a county paper out of Scotland. The Ayrshire News is out with a headline that reads, quote, South Ayrshire Golf Club owner loses 2020 presidential election. Okay. Richard Haass, Daniel Drezner, thank you both very much for coming on the show this morning. And
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.